Okay, erector pili. The erector pili is smooth muscle. It's a smooth muscle that actually extends from the dermal root sheath here up here to a dermal papillae. Okay, so it goes up to the papillary layer of the dermis. Excuse me, sorry. This actually, when it pulls, takes the hair from being kind of at an angle like this to more of an angle like this. This is what gives you goosebumps. So when you get the kukui feeling like there's a monster under your bed and your hair stands up, it's this guy that's responsible for that. It happens to us when we're cold. It happens to us when we're scared. And back in the day, when we kind of looked like the Yeti, this made a lot of sense because if we were cold, we had enough fur on our body that it poofed out and it made a nice little barrier between us and the outer elements. Or when we were scared, if we poofed up when we had hair like Chewbacca, then we looked really intimidating and bigger. It doesn't do that much for us anymore because we're not that furry anymore. At least most of us aren't that furry anymore. So when our hair stands on end, it's not like we look more intimidating. So it's kind of a vestigial thing. The closest, I guess, comparisons that I can make are cats. When cats get really, really upset, their fur kind of goes right? And then on top of that, they'll get on their tiptoes and do that as they walk towards you and make their back like bow really, really big. The reason that they're doing that is because they're trying to make themselves look bigger and more intimidating, which were great if we were, the same size as a cat, but we're not. But that's kind of what this is supposed to do for us. It doesn't do that anymore, though. Okay, so the skin glands. The major skin glands we're going to talk about are the sebaceous glands and the sediferous glands. And in the sediferous categories, we've got eccrine and we've got apocrine. So the sebaceous glands, they are located in the dermis. They're simple compound alveolar glands that produce sebum. Sebum is oil. It's the oily white substance that is very rich in lipids that basically helps to moisturize our hair. They are holocrine glands, meaning that the cells slough off of the side. This is going back to chapter 4. They slough off of the side and become part of the secretion. So this is a sebaceous gland, and it's a compound sebaceous gland. Alveolar, that's what those little grapes are. So most of the time, almost all of the time, this is going to be connected by a duct to a hair follicle. The duct is just the tube that connects this gland, the sebaceous gland, to this hair. It prevents drying of our hair and it protects against some bacteria because some bacteria don't like oil. We do have a tendency to wash our hair and process our hair until there's almost no oil left. But the purpose behind it from back in the day is actually to protect our hair and to keep it moisturized. Very, very few open to the skin surface. There really aren't that many. We have a few on our lips, some in our eyelids, actually to help keep our tears within the confines of our eye, and some around the genitalia, but again, they're kind of rare. Now, the sediferous glands. Sediferous glands are sweat glands, and they kind of look like somebody took a water hose, dropped it, and then held on to one end of that hose. Okay, so the most common type found are the eccrine sweat glands. Eccrine means everywhere. That's why they're the most common type found. The only, well, actually, I was going to say the only place you don't find them. One of the places that you find them that is kind of interesting is your hands and your feet. We talked about making our hands and our feet slightly damp when we're nervous because of a predator or something like that, giving us better grip. That's why they're there. As I said, it kind of looks like a water hose. So it's a simple coiled tubular gland. It's a tube that is long, but it's only one tube. And you've got this duct. Remember, duct just means tube. You've got this tube that opens to the skin surface. So technically, you have two parts to this gland. Okay? Dun, 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 dun. I need a highlighter. Okay, you've got this deep coiled region down here. And then you've got the duct region, which is the tube that's coming all the way to the surface. So that deep coiled region in yellow is going to be what produces the sweat. It's isotonic fluid that includes water, some salt, small amounts of urea, ammonia, uric acid, and lactic acid, which are waste products you find in urine, which is why when people get sweaty, they don't smell like roses. And then you've got the duct, this tube here, that actually passes it to the surface. So I'm making it down here, but as it fills up, eventually it reaches the surface up here. Okay? Eccrine sweat glands are involved in temperature regulation. Their job is to kind of wet the surface of the body when we're warm. And the hope is that a breeze will come by, the sweat will evaporate, and it'll take the heat with it. Yeah, fantastic. Where do we live? We live in South Texas. What's the humidity in South Texas? 100%. So that idea of a breeze coming by and the sweat evaporating, it's not necessarily the best idea in South Texas. Now, the apocrine sweat gland, this dude here. It is also a simple coiled tubular gland. Again, looks like a water hose that they dropped one end and kept the other in their hand. The difference is, one, when these things become active, two, where you find them, and three, kind of what they do. So the duct opens into a hair follicle, and it usually opens right above the oil gland, the sebaceous gland, okay? In humans, we find these in places that we get hair after puberty. So around the axilla, our armpits, around the genitalia, around the anus. You don't find these everywhere, okay? So if you think apocrine, think armpit, because we get hair there after puberty. We don't have enough for these to regulate temperature. Okay, so they have nothing to do with regulating our temperature. What they do is they do release some chemicals that produce odor once bacteria processes them. This is why kids can get sweaty, and yes, they smell, but they don't smell that bad. Once people hit puberty, yeah, the smell can get kind of worse. Okay. As I said, they're only active at puberty and after puberty. And before that, they're there, but they don't do anything. They don't produce any type of product at all. In fact, the tube is actually a solid tube instead of being a hollow hose that can carry product. They do get activated through sex hormone stimulation. So when we start getting, for boys, the surges of testosterone to make them mature, or for girls, our surges of estrogen and progesterone, that's when they really start working. And it may be a sign of sexual maturity. Okay? So those are the two major glands, the sebaceous that produces oil and the two sediferous that are going to be producing sweat. Now, the cereminous glands. Cereminous glands are actually modified sweat glands, but they exist in your ear. So that tube that carries sound into your eardrum actually is lined with cereminous glands. So if you put your finger in your ear and you wiggle it around and take your finger out, what are you left with? Earwax, right? So cereminous glands are basically making earwax. That's what they do. Now I know everybody's going, ugh, earwax does serve a purpose. Okay, so you should have some earwax. I'm not saying that you should have enough earwax to make a candle like you're in Shrek. That isn't it. But you do have earwax to make the lining of that tube slightly sticky, which means that if there are little floaties in the air, if there's debris in the air, it gets stuck on top of the wax and it doesn't go all the way to your eardrum. Even tiny insects may get caught in that wax and die as opposed to going into your ear. The last gland we're going to talk about are the mammary glands. The mammary glands are actually modified apocrine sweat glands. How do I know that? Because they don't become active until puberty. Okay. Now, admitted, it is very modified because they are not producing sweat, they're producing milk. Their job is to produce milk when you have a baby. So, again, it is very modified, but technically it's an apocrine sweat gland. Your nails. Your nails are also accessory structures. You find them at the distal ends of the primate digit. Fancy. In other words, they're at the ends of your fingers and toes. They grow about 0.5 to 1.2 millimeters a day. Again, this is average. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's grow that fast. Your fingernails do grow faster than your toenails, though. Unlike hair that has that growth stage and resting stage, these don't have a resting stage. They just continuously grow. So, what's the function of our nails? Well, one of the functions is protection. It's a nice little shield to have over the ends of your fingers. Manipulation is another one. Anybody who has ever had that, conversation of, hey, do you have nails? Right? Because if you don't, you can't necessarily do everything that everybody else can do that has nails. Grasping of small objects. This goes back to if you've ever had your acrylic nails, pick up a dime. How hard is that when you have acrylic nails? It's awful, right? And then there's scratching. Now, by scratching, I don't mean like I'm getting into a fight, I'm gonna scratch your eyes out. Nothing like that. I'm talking about like for digging or for moving things out of the way or scratching, even scratch offs. If you have nails, you can do that. Okay. Now, the nail itself consists of two major parts. This is going to switch slides on me. Yeah, sorry. You've got the nail root. The nail root is the part of the nail that is covered by skin, just like the hair root was under the skin. The nail root is under the skin. Then you've got the body. The body is the part of the nail that you can see. Okay, so it's the visible portion. The nail fold, the nail groove. So cutting the nail, okay, cutting somebody's finger, you'll notice that there's kind of a little culvert here on the side. And you've got this little overhang of skin, right? That culvert is the nail groove, okay? And your nail actually fits inside of that groove. That extra bit of skin that's kind of hanging out on top of it, that's the fold. And it's there for a reason. If I rub my finger this way, there is no chance I'm catching the edge of that nail and actually pulling it up because this is in the way, okay? The epinecium and the hyponychium. So the epinecium you probably already know. It's the cuticle. It's what we call the cuticle of the nail. Kind of helps hold the nail in place. Gives us a nice edge around our nail. The hyponychium is this thickened skin that is right below the free edge of our nail. Everybody has probably had that experience where this separates and then you go somewhere and get tea and you squeeze the lemon and it burns like all get out because you actually separated that from the bottom of your nail. That's the hyponychium. It anchors down the free edge of your nail. That's what it's supposed to do. The root, like we talked about, is the part that is below the skin. But as you get further away from that root, you get to the nail matrix. Just like the hair matrix, this is the part that actually creates the nail. It produces the majority of the nail. If I were to completely remove the nail itself, that fleshy portion underneath here would be the nail bed. So I think of it this way personally. I say, just like my bed holds my body, the nail bed holds the nail body. And then here, see that white little half moon there? This is called the lanula. The lanula is the crescent-shaped area at the base of the nail. It has almost no color, primarily because it is thicker than the rest of the nail. For people who have long nails and grow their nails out, you can actually kind of feel there's kind of a bump there, and that's because this is thicker than the rest of the nail. Now, as the nail grows out, of course, there's trauma to the nails, so it kind of gets thinner. So, after talking about all these parts and pieces of the integumentary system, now let's talk about what the functions are. And now that we've talked about all of these parts and pieces, this is going to make a lot more sense. So, protection is the first function. Function. Okay, we already know that our epidermis protects from abrasion. When we tan, it protects from UV light. It prevents entry of microorganisms, because if microorganisms get into the first, let's say, 20 layers of our skin, it's not going to matter because those 20 layers are all dead, okay? It helps to regulate our body temperature. That is a protective function. That is something that keeps us in homeostasis. Our body doesn't overheat. That's great. It prevents water loss. We talked about the fact that we've got oils in between the cells of our skin, and those oils help to prevent water loss, as well as the hard keratin kind of creating those little shields in the cells. Hair, and I know you're probably going, hair? Hair protects against abrasion too. I don't care if you have short hair or you have long hair. The fact that you've got it right on top of your skull protects your skull. What's in your skull that's so important? Your brain, right? Not only do we have protection against abrasion, but we also block UV light just by having hair. The hair is colored, whether it's blonde, red, brown, or black. There is color there that should help to absorb the UV light in the dead hair instead of it getting further down. It also makes for a great heat insulator. Now, I know living in South Texas, that isn't necessarily the most important thing in the world, but for people that live up north where it's a lot cooler, having long hair is actually fairly beneficial, because you can use it as an insulator not only for your head, but for your neck. Finally, your nails protect the end of your digits. It protects the ends of your fingers and it protects the ends of your toes. Sensation. So remember all of those sensory receptors we talked about, the free nerve endings, the Pacinian corpuscles, the Mesner's corpuscles, the Ruffini end organs. All of these are ways that we detect the external environment, and they're embedded in our skin. So pain, touch, hot, cold, pressure, all of these are important for us to respond to our environment. They allow for a proper response to our environment. If you're next to a bonfire and it starts getting hot enough that it's painful, you move away from the bonfire. You don't just sit there and take it, because if you sit there and take it, eventually you're going to cause damage to your body. it gives us the ability to respond properly, our ability to detect sensation. Temperature regulation. Now, we kind of touched on this when we were talking about the sweat glands. Through dilation and constriction of our blood vessels, the skin controls heat loss from the body. So we know that sweat glands produce sweat. We know that when we go outside into the hot South Texas sun, our blood goes to the surface of our body and we end up red and flushed, right? The hope, like I said before, is that a breeze comes by, the sweat evaporates, it cools the surface of our body. And when it cools the surface of our body, it also cools the blood so that when it recirculates back into the core of our body, it's a little bit cooler. Again, we're not talking 30 degrees. We're talking about maybe, a quarter of a degree, but it's hopefully enough to kind of keep our body cooler. The opposite of that, when it is cold, the blood vessels in our skin actually constrict and they restrict the amount of blood that is allowed to go to the surface of my body. If my body is already cold, I don't want to cool it down anymore. So I'm not saying I cut off blood flow. That isn't it. I just restrict it. Only so much is allowed to go. Vitamin D production. Okay, so skin exposed to UV light produces something called cholecalciferol. Cholecalciferol is kind of pre-vitamin D, pre-active vitamin D, pre-what we need. That goes to the liver where it's modified. And then, actually two places, the liver and then the kidneys to form the active form of vitamin D that we need. Vitamin D increases calcium levels by promoting calcium uptake from your intestine, from your bone, and from your kidneys. Okay, so our kidneys will basically throw excess calcium into the urine and we urinate it out. But if we need it, when this system happens, the kidneys go, oh, wait a minute, I got to get that back. I can't just let that go. So the kidneys pull it back. The intestines basically get the message, hey, if there's any calcium in that food that they just ate, bring that in. So you get calcium from the food that you eat. The matrix of your bone is actually made out of calcium phosphate. So I can dissolve some of that matrix and get calcium. Now you might be going, okay, isn't calcium for strong bones? Yes and no. It is what makes our bones strong. The hard part of our bones is actually made out of something called calcium phosphate. But calcium does more than that in your body. All of your muscles run on calcium. So you want your heart to beat, you got to have calcium. You want to be able to breathe, you got to have calcium. You want to be able to move your body, you got to have calcium. Also, every neuron, every nerve in your body runs on calcium. So if you want to be able to tell your body to move, you got to have calcium. If you want to form a memory, you have to have calcium. So calcium is really important. Now, back in the day, again, cave people living out on the Serengeti, when that time happened, it wasn't like, especially because most people were nomadic, you had livestock that you could milk and get calcium or get vitamin D from. Okay. So we evolved to have this ability to make our vitamin D, starting with skin getting exposed to sunlight. Vitamin D helped us, this ability, I should say, to make vitamin D with our skin and sunlight helped us. Nowadays, you go to, I don't know, Walmart and you buy milk and it's vitamin D fortified, and you buy yogurt and it's vitamin D fortified. You buy cheese and it has vitamin D. But, back in the day when we were cave people, that really wasn't an option. Excretion. Okay, the skin glands remove small amounts of waste products. So remember I said when we sweat, some of it is urea, uric acid, and ammonia. These are waste products. Now, I'm not going to lie. The amount of waste our skin produces is very minimal. I mean, minimal, minimal. Our kidneys do more as far as waste removal than our skin does. But the fact still remains that our skin does it. So it's still a function of our skin. Again, this is one of the reasons why you go outside, you work out, whatever, and you come in sweaty, you don't smell like roses. Okay, so the man on your left is 91 years old. He is a monk who spent most of his life indoors. The woman on the right is a Native American woman who is 62 years old. She is 30 years younger than the man on the left. Who looks older? Yeah, I would go with this one too. What's the difference? The Native American woman spent a lot of her life out in the sun. That's the difference. When we talk about sun damage to the skin, this is what we mean. The monk spent most of his life inside, so he wasn't exposed to a lot of sunlight. Sun does damage, period. The UV rays do damage. So push comes to shove, if we're talking about, going to a tanning bed, you're still doing the same thing. Tanning beds don't they're no different than going out in the sun and tanning. If you want to look older faster, do that. If you don't. Simple. If you still want to get a tan, I guess, safest way to do it without this happening is to use fake bake. But notoriously, fake bake makes you more orange than it makes you look tan. So if you find a good one, stick with it. But yeah, this is the risk when you go out and you tan in the sun. So the effects of aging on the integumentary system. As the body ages, everything goes downhill. Sorry. So, one of the issues that we face as we age is that the blood flow to the skin declines. And with that decline in blood flow, we end up with thinner skin. And we talked about this in chapter 4. The elastic fibers aren't as elastic anymore. If you take care of geriatric patients, remember I talked earlier about, catching the edge of a desk? Your skin at a younger age, you might get a red spot for a little bit, like somebody smacked you, but you're fine. An older person's skin tears like tissue paper. And something that should be a red spot that goes away in 15 minutes ends up being a wound because their skin is so fine and paper thin. Another issue that you have as you get older is that the sediferous glands, your sweat glands, and your sebaceous glands, your oil glands, are less active, which creates dry skin. The number of melanocytes also decreases. You know how your hair goes gray as you get older. Believe me, I know I got gray hair everywhere. Your skin also lightens up. So not only are you suffering from dry skin, but your ability to tan that skin also kind of goes down because you don't have as many active melanocytes as you used to.